Imagine waking up one morning and hearing this. Starting next week, almost every product coming into the U.S., cars, phones, clothes, even coffee, could cost more. Why? Because Donald Trump just announced a wave of global tariffs so sudden, so sweeping, it sent shockwaves through the world economy. No warning, no slow rollout, just a straight-up economic punch that left governments scrambling, businesses panicking, and allies stunned. But here's the twist. It might be exactly what he wanted. Because in Trump's world, disruption isn't collateral damage, it's strategy. And now, months after the initial panic, he's calling it a win. Trump is boasting of economic victories. A dozen new trade deals, a surge in tariff revenue, claims that manufacturing will return home, that billions in foreign investment are flooding in. On the surface, it sounds like mission accomplished. But here's the truth behind the headlines. This victory may be a lot more fragile and a lot more dangerous than it seems. To fully understand the weight of these recent tariffs, we have to rewind a bit back to April. That's when Trump dropped the bombshell. He announced sweeping new import tariffs that would have affected everything from British cars to Chinese semiconductors. The announcement sent financial markets into chaos. Global stocks took a hit. Currencies wobbled. Trade partners bristled. Faced with immediate panic, Trump hit the brakes. Most tariffs were put on hold. But that wasn't surrender. It was recalibration. Fast forward 4 months, and Trump has quietly reimposed many of the same tariffs. This time, with less immediate backlash. Why? Because he rolled them out with a calculated mix of intimidation and negotiation. He issued an ultimatum, agreed to a new trade deal with the U.S. by August 1st, or face punishing tariffs. His trade advisor, Peter Navarro, even bragged they'd secure 90 deals in 90 days. That didn't happen. What they got instead was about a dozen deals, some just 1 or 2 pages long. Many lacked the detail and legal structure typical of past U.S. trade agreements. But they served Trump's message: America is winning. Take the UK, for example. They struck early and got a relatively light 10% tariff on most goods, better than the 15% slapped on the EU and Japan. Why? Because the U.S. runs a trade deficit with those nations. Trump's core complaint is that America is being ripped off, and he sees tariffs as a way to level the playing field. But even for those who signed deals, there were strings attached. In many cases, countries had to agree to purchase more U.S. goods or invest in American industries. Those who didn't comply got hit harder. South Korea, Cambodia, Pakistan all got the treatment. If you didn't say yes to Trump, you got a letter saying, "Thank you for your attention to this matter," followed by tariffs. So, has the strategy worked? In some ways, yes. The worst-case scenarios, the global recessions, the economic collapses, haven't materialized. The financial markets have stabilized. U.S. stocks are up. Some clarity has returned. Exporters now know what tariffs to expect. Companies have resumed hiring. Investments are flowing again. There's a sense of certainty, even if it's not the kind most economists would prefer. But don't let that fool you. That certainty comes at a cost. The average tariff rate for goods entering the U.S. has jumped from 2% to nearly 17%. That's a massive leap. And while Trump may tout that as leverage or revenue, it's American consumers who ultimately pay the price. And here's where things get political and personal. These tariffs are starting to hurt the very voters who put Trump in office. Working-class Americans, families who are already battling inflation, shoppers who are now paying more for everything from shoes to smartphones. And that's where things get messy. But before we go further, if you're finding this breakdown helpful and want to stay ahead of the headlines with clear, no-nonsense explanations, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It really helps us grow this channel and bring you deeper stories that matter. All right, back to it. Now, let's talk about the winners and losers. India, for example, got hit with tariffs over 25%, but the impact might be smaller than you think. Only about 2% of India's GDP comes from exports to the U.S. So while the tariffs sting, they don't cripple. Germany, on the other hand, isn't so lucky. A 15% tariff on its auto exports could knock half a percentage point off its GDP growth. That's serious, especially for a country already on the edge of recession. And then there's China, the elephant in the room. Trump's tariffs hit China hard in his first term. But now, there's a new layer. Companies like Apple have already started shifting production to India and Vietnam. India recently became the top smartphone supplier to the U.S., not because of better deals, but because of fear. Fear of what could happen if Trump escalates his trade war with China again. That fear, that uncertainty, it's driving a realignment of global trade. Vietnam and the Philippines are quietly gaining. They have lower tariffs and are seen as safer partners. Meanwhile, traditional allies like the EU are rethinking their ties with the US. In fact, the EU has already begun looking for new alliances. The UK is trying to wrap up a deal with India. Everyone is hedging against the possibility that the US, once the cornerstone of global trade, might now be its most unpredictable player. And there's another layer to all this, the US economy itself. Yes, growth picked up in the spring, but economists say that was temporary, a rush of exports before tariffs kicked in. Now that momentum is fading. The tariffs have added over $100 billion in revenue to the US Treasury this year. That's about 5% of total federal revenue, double what tariffs contributed just a few years ago. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent expects it to hit $300 billion by year's end. But here's the problem. That money is coming out of consumers' pockets. Prices are going up. Brands like Adidas and Unilever are already warning of sticker shock. And if prices rise too fast, it could delay Trump's desired interest rate cuts, or even slow down the economy. To make matters worse, many of the deals Trump announced aren't even signed. Some are verbal agreements. Others are still in negotiation. In some cases, foreign leaders have denied the existence of the terms Trump described. That raises a critical question. Is this really a victory, or just a PR blitz? The U.S. hasn't finalized deals with major partners like Canada, Taiwan, or Mexico. China is still unresolved. In sectors like steel and pharmaceuticals, massive parts of the global economy are still waiting for answers. Trump says his ultimate goal is to bring jobs and manufacturing back to the U.S. But history shows that tariffs alone rarely achieve that. In fact, some analysts warn this could backfire. If countries grow tired of U.S. unpredictability, they may build new trade routes that bypass America entirely. And once those networks are built, they're hard to unwind. In other words, America may be using its leverage today, but it might not have the same leverage tomorrow. So yes, Trump's tariffs avoided immediate disaster. They generated revenue. They forced countries to the table. But they also risk alienating allies, driving up prices, and slowing growth. And most of all, they gamble with long-term economic stability in exchange for short-term wins. For the average American, that means higher prices, fewer choices, and more uncertainty. And for Trump, it means walking a razor's edge between political victory and economic backlash. Will these tariffs transform the global trade system, or will they simply isolate America while the rest of the world moves on? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain. The price of this so-called victory might end up being far higher than anyone bargained for.